Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Aquarium Online Academy. We're sorry for the delay. We were having some technical difficulties. Well, welcome to our Ocean Ranger class of our Summer Kids Club with the Aquarium Online Academy. My name is James. I work at the Education Department here at the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach. We have Jen helping control the fun pictures behind us, and Carrie's going to be writing down your question. If you have questions about our topic today, you can text them in. Remember that text rates apply. So if you're one of our younger viewers, have an adult help you out. That text number is 562-286-1838. You can also email us. If you're not watching live, you can also email some questions in, and we can help answer those for you too. Our team of educators will be standing by waiting to help you out. So our topic today is not sharks specifically, although these are some really fun sharks. It's life cycles. But what is a life cycle? If you watched before, Jen, I think, talked about how frogs and jellies have babies. So it's not just having babies. It's about the babies being born or hatched or however they enter the world. And then they have to grow up, and then they have to have babies on their own. And then, unfortunately, the last part of the life cycle is that they pass away. That is part of nature, though, and sometimes things, they pass away from old age. Maybe they're ill. Maybe they get eaten by stuff. That's a natural part of the world is animals eat other animals. That's pretty common. But let's talk about some really interesting species that we have today. So last time we talked about the frogs and the jellies. If you remember anything about them, they have a very unique life cycle where frogs go through multiple stages of design before they reach their adult body type. We call that complete metamorphosis. Some animals have what we call incomplete metamorphosis. The babies pretty much look exactly like the adults. So people kind of go through that. Sharks do that. Some fish really do change a lot in their life cycle. So a generic fish like you think of might change colors over time. It might get a little bit longer snout, or the fins change shape. So if as long as they're changing their body style, it's not an incomplete metamorphosis. So we go through an incomplete. The jelly goes through a complete metamorphosis. They look very different in all the different stages of their life cycle. But let's talk about some other animals and the process of how they have babies, or even how they carry their babies, because that can be very different among the animal world. So when you think of a fish having babies, what's something that comes to mind? Laying eggs. Do you know fish that lay eggs? A lot of them do. Some fish have what we call live birth. So there wasn't an egg. The baby stayed inside the mother fish, and then they had a yolk sac attached to them so that they could still get nutrients. They're not like mammals where they get nutrients from the blood flow from mom, but they do stay inside the parent fish until they pop out and they're live born. So we can look at one example of a fish that lays eggs, like a clownfish. They lay eggs, and their habit is to lay eggs near dangerous stuff to other fish. So sometimes animals use part of their environment to protect their babies. Not just themselves, but their environment too. So if you lay your eggs near a anemone or in a cave, or there's some fish that actually hold the eggs in their mouth and wait till they hatch. The best place to hide something is, next to your teeth. Nothing wants to really grab it from there. Well, then there's other ways that some fish have their babies. The really special ones to think about are the seahorses and the sea dragons. So let's take another look at another fish like this one. What do you remember about seahorses and sea dragons? What do they do with their eggs? Well, on a seahorse, the dad carries the eggs. So it wasn't that dad was pregnant. That's sometimes what we misinterpret the information to be, is that dad had always had the eggs. But that's not really what happened. What happens is the male and female fish, the male will fertilize the eggs for the female, and then she gives him the eggs. So she had them to start with. She gave the eggs to the male seahorse, and he carries them in a pouch on his stomach. The sea dragons are a little different. Same process. The male fertilizes the eggs. The female gives the eggs to the male, but he doesn't have a pouch to put them in. So what does he do with them? Hangs on to them in an armpit? Nah, they don't have arms. No armpits. What they do instead is this patch on their stomach is really sticky, and the colors will change on that patch to let the female know he's ready to hold on to eggs. So in some cases, when they don't latch on the eggs, that means the male wasn't either fully ready to accept them, or that just means that they won't be able to have any baby fish that round, because the chances of the fish hatching when the male's not carrying them are very, very low. So the male will carry the eggs on their stomach rather than in a pouch in their stomach. That's pretty cool. Now, a good question came in from Bastian about when they grow up. How are they changing color? Well, let's think about ourselves for a minute. Do we change colors at all? My hair is going to get gray and white as I get older. My skin gets darker if I'm out in the sun a lot more. So our bodies create what we call pigment. Now, the pigment in our skin is called melanin. If you're a lighter skin person, you just have less melanin. If you're a darker skin person, you have more melanin. And for all of us, the more we're out in the sun, the more opportunity your skin is going to have to make melanin. For fish, though, sometimes that process of creating pigment is really designed for hiding or signaling that you're a kid, like this one. The little Garibaldi kids have these really bright blue spots on their body. Now, Garibaldi are normally super bright orange. Why would you want to advertise even more so where you are by being bright orange and blue? What if, instead of wanting to hide, because Garibaldi don't like to hide, they're all big attitude like, don't mess with me, I'm a Garibaldi. But what if instead it was a different kind of signal? Not to hide, not to scare something away either, but a signal of, hey, don't worry about me. I'm a little kid fish. I'm not here to bug you. So what happens is the baby Garibaldi will be able to move through the adult Garibaldi's territories or ranges, and they won't be bothered by the adults, because this coloring lets the adults know that one's not really a threat. I don't have to worry about that fish at all. But as they grow up, they lose the blue pigment in their body and they turn into this. So what happens during a lifetime of an animal is that our genetics can be turned on and off at certain phases or by certain factors of our environment. Let's think about how that might work. Remember, if I go stand out in the sun for a little while, my skin's going to make more melanin. That's a signal that my skin gets from the sunlight, from repeated exposure to sunlight, to create more melanin to protect me from UV radiation. Well, as a fish grows up, the genetics will turn off the blue pigment parts of their genetics. They stop making it, and they'll just be orange the rest of their life. That's really, really special way to grow up through your life cycle, is that you change color or even shape and size and style as you grow up. The flatfish like flounder, turbot, and halibut go through a very extravagant change. So they don't start out like this. If you look really closely, there's one eye, there's two eyes on one side of their head. So instead of having both eyes facing forward like a fish that swims upright, once they're a baby for a little while, they're called baby fish, called fish fry. So once they're fry and they start to move to one side, some fish, they can lean left or right and turn into what we see here. Other species is always one side. But whatever side they're going to be laying down on, that eye will move to the top of the body, whatever's going to be sitting above the sand. So here's a baby halibut or baby flatfish. They don't have any coloring or pigment. So to help with Bastian's answer is that if you're see-through as a baby, nobody can find you. That's a really good game of hide and seek if you're invisible, right? But as you grow up, you start to develop those adaptations where you can hide in the sand or the gravel or the bottom of the seafloor and get away from those predators. And then your body is going to look like what we saw in the previous picture as an adult flatfish. So as things age, there's different levels of pigment that develop or stop being developed, and even shapes of their face, shapes of their fins. An eyeball moves to the other side of the skull. All really cool ways that our bodies are changing as we grow up. And that's just all what's coded into our DNA and what gets turned on or off as a signal of, oh, gotta start doing that. Oh, don't do that anymore. So our genetics are really, really specialized at helping us survive. Let's take a look at another interesting animal's part of their life cycle. Oh, I think we have a... Nope, we don't have a question coming in. I was going to wait for a second. Okay, so we're going to look at another animal and how their life cycle in having babies is a little bit different than we might expect. So let's take a look at sharks. Because sharks have a very extravagant way of doing all of these things. Some sharks, like the great white, have live birth. Remember what we said about that? They don't start out in an egg case, but they do have a yolk sac attached to them. And then they grow up in mom, and then they'll be birthed from mom. But this is an actual shark egg. So shark reproduction happens in one of three ways, or sometimes two of three, depending on what species you are. They can either lay eggs, like this one. This one looks like it came from, I think, a bamboo shark, or maybe even a swell shark. They can have live birth, like the great white, or they do a combination of eggs and live birth. So they all have these really big scientific names, like viviparous, oviparous, and ovoviviparous. And basically it's just describing how they have their babies. Now, we've even described animals based off of the way they have babies. So the way we divide skates and rays is not just that they sting or don't sting, but it's how they have babies. Because some rays aren't stingrays, and some rays are. And skates don't always have thorny ridges on their back. So we've divided them based off of how they have babies. The rays and the skates do one of either one. They either lay eggs or they have live birth. So the skates lay eggs, the rays will have live birth, and then there's kind of something like a guitarfish that has a body like a skate but has babies like a ray does. So they've adapted multiple characteristics from multiple groups to be able to survive in their environment. That's really interesting. So sharks have kind of expanded the options of how animals can have babies and reproduce. Let's go back to the picture of the great white real quick. Because if you think you had an interesting childhood with annoying siblings, I don't think it was quite as bad as a great white. So great whites have this really, it's kind of a darker part of their story life, but it's something that happens in nature. When they're in mom, like in utero, you might say, the babies run out of yolk sac, but they aren't going to be born yet. So they compete with each other, and only one, maybe two really get to be born because they've consumed their siblings. So you think sibling rivalry is bad, it's really bad for great whites. But that's part of the natural cycle. That's how people first started describing what we call survival of the fittest, which is not entirely true. It's not only the fittest. It's usually fit enough to survive. Works on a rule of averages. As long as you're good enough, these animals should be able to survive long enough to have their own babies. So that's how that works. Now, Cora's asking, how big is that shark egg? Well, I actually have a couple of shark eggs. Let me go grab them real quick, and we'll show you what that looks like. They're in my drawer over here. Aha! Now, this one is not the same as this species. This one came from a zebra shark. Zebra sharks get about 7 to 10, 12 feet long. And this is about, the size of my hand. The babies are born or hatch themselves out of here. They hatch out at about this long, a little bit longer. But for other sharks, they have either smaller eggs or even differently shaped eggs. This one is almost like a football with a spiral on it. This came from a horn shark. So the one that was in the picture is from a bamboo shark. Bamboo sharks only get about 3 feet. This one's from a zebra shark. This one's from a horn shark. So sharks will even lay different shapes of eggs because they lay them in different areas, or the eggs need to be anchored down. So all of these little tendrils right here, all of this stringy stuff, the zebra shark basically ties this down. So what happens in the egg-laying process for a zebra shark is the tendrils start to come out first. That zebra shark is going to swim over an object, something that is either pokey or prickly enough that the tendrils will catch. And it eventually will help catch enough that it helps pull the egg out. They wrap it around something, and now this egg is tied down to something on the sea floor. And mom swims away. You might think it's kind of mean to not care for and look after the babies, but that's also part of the natural life cycle of a lot of animals. They lay the eggs, and then the eggs hatch, and then they're on their own. A lot of the animals, once they hatch out of an egg, or in some cases, once they're live birthed, they're ready to go out and be just whoever they need to be. They have all the abilities that they need to survive right away. So that's pretty cool. All right, we got a follow-up. How big is the great white shark? Real big. All right, so when we look at the great white shark again, this shark could be, the maximum I ever recorded was about 22 feet long. So the full-size adult could be at least 15 feet. That's a big shark. Only like 5% of shark species get to be that big. It's a really small amount of sharks that get over 15 feet long. And especially up to the 20-foot line. There's only a few species that I know of that really get over 20 feet, like the great hammerhead, the great white, the megamouth, the whale shark, the basking shark. That's just like 5 of over 400 species that I know of off the top of my head that can get over 19 feet long. Not very many. But the cool thing is their babies are born my size. Yeah, they're at like 5-6 foot long plus. Maybe sometimes they're a little bit bigger. So when they first come out, they're already like a full-size shark, you would say. They're actually about the size of a blacktip reef shark when they first come out, and about 5 feet long. So here's a blacktip. So when their babies come out, they are live, but they're only about that long. That shark only gets about 5 feet. So if you're a 20-foot potentially long shark, your babies are going to start pretty big. The bigger the animals are, the bigger the babies tend to be. But not always. The whale shark babies actually are a little bit smaller than we might expect. And, that's okay. They're a filter feeding animal, so when they have to just mosey around the ocean and filter plankton out, they don't have to necessarily have the same size to grab large prey as a great white would do. But that's an interesting thing to think about, is having their diet change as they grow up too. Now, the cool thing that I want to also share with you is about the mammals in the ocean, because there's not just fish and sharks and rays and jellies and all those fun things. There's other animals that have babies in the ocean too, like whales and dolphins and seals and sea lions. Where does a seal or a sea lion have their babies? Do you think they have them in the ocean? If you've watched a few nature documentaries, you've probably seen what we call a rookery. It's an area on the beach where all the adults hang out, and that's where they have their babies. They have to have their baby on land. The babies really don't know what they're doing to swim yet. They kind of learn that later. So the sea lions and the seals will have a specialized area of a beach that they will have babies on. Well, what about the whales? Do the whales go up on the beach to have babies? Not quite. So they have a little bit different effect. So the seals and sea lions, they have their baby on land. Mom will go hunt, come back, feed the baby, and that's how that works. So in a lot of cases, the rookery or that kind of colony of seals and sea lions, they may or may not take care of each other. The babies do have to be careful because they're much smaller than the adults. But because they group together in such large numbers, there's that challenge of surviving even as a young animal, even if you're not in the ocean. Shinja asked, do other animals attack the eggs, and would they be able to defend themselves? Good question. So let's go back to the egg real quick, because they're not having eggs. They're mammals. They lay babies like we do. So the egg is left on its own. Now, it's a really tough material. When it's dried out, it's actually really, really hard. When it's not dried out, it's still really tough material. It's kind of leathery and difficult to get through. Some animals could eat the eggs, but it's a lot of things that are not going to have the most energy for that animal that they eat it. So whenever you think about in nature things that eat eggs, there's a lot of animals that will scavenge and find a nest of eggs that have been left behind or unattended for a short while. The eggs have a lot of nutrient value, so that's why some animals eat them. But the shark egg, because of the difficulty of getting through this material, might not give them as much energy as they would need if they're out in the ocean. The other thing is these camouflage really well on the sea floor. Now, especially the sharks that live here in the kelp forest habitat, these hide really well inside the kelp. So it may be that the eggs are so well hidden, that is the defense. Great question. Now, Cora wants to know what a megamouth shark looks like. I don't have a picture of one of them, but we might be able to find a picture of a basking shark. Very similar. Basically, it's a shark with a really big, wide face that does that. They swim through the water with their mouth open, and they can filter the food out. Now, the nose and the mouth are going to be different shapes on a megamouth shark than on a basking shark, just like the basking shark doesn't look exactly like a whale shark does. So the megamouth has more color like this shark does, but has a face a little bit closer to a whale shark. So we have to use our imaginations because we don't have a picture of it to show you. Sorry. All right, let's go back to the whales though. So sharks they lay eggs or they don't. Whales, do they lay eggs? No, they have live birth. Now, one of the fun questions I like to ask my learners is, when a whale's born, do you think the whale was head first or tail first? So while you're thinking about that, what would be the advantage of head first versus tail first being born? By asking us questions about why do they sometimes give birth in different ways, it's all about adaptations and what's the best way for a thing to survive, to have its babies, so those babies can grow up and have babies of their own. So this whole cycle is have babies, babies are born, babies grow up, now they're adults, adults have to have more babies, babies are born, it just keeps going around and around. So the way that they have babies or they lay eggs or however their young are produced really is what's the best advantage for that organism. So if you were a barnacle, you don't swim anywhere. You've landed on a surface, you're stuck there forever. And you're supposed to be because you're going to filter plankton as it swims by. They can't really get up and move around to find a mate. So the best adaptation for them to be able to reproduce is to release sperm or egg into the water. It's called broadcast spawning. They broadcast spawn into the water. And if they're a benthic seafloor animal, or like a barnacle can actually mate with the barnacle next to them. So some seafloor animals have figured out how to mate with one next door. Some have figured out that they have to release as many reproductive cells in the water as possible in order for them to try and have babies, like coral. Coral will do that. So here's a picture of a barnacle. Barnacle actually can mate with a barnacle next to them, but mussels are not going to be like that. So the barnacles live near the mussels, and the mussels are going to be a little bit different in how they have babies, and even more so than like the anemones and the sea urchins. So all these animals have all these different specialized methods to have babies based off of where they live and what is needed for them to survive. So here's a picture of some gooseneck barnacles, some regular black California mussels. And, I think that might be a snail. Some really cool things in the tide pool habitat. Now, let's go back to the whale. Have you figured out if it's tail first or face first that they're born? What's the more typical way a person's born? It's head first. Well, we breathe air, so that's normal for us, right? Well, whales breathe air too, but they're in the water. They are born tail first. So the last part of them that is birthed from mom is the face. Mom can help pick them up, push them up to the surface of the water to get their first breath of air. Remember we said if you're a big animal, you tend to have big babies. Well, let's take a look at the biggest animal on our planet, the blue whale. So Cora's question of what's the biggest whale, it is the blue whale. Imagine two humpbacks lined up behind each other. That's the length of a blue whale. Blue whales have been measured up to 100, estimated up to 110 feet long. Well, that means they're going to have some pretty large babies. Here's a picture of a blue whale that we use for photo identification reasons. That's why everything else has been cropped out of the photo. Now, this whale is a big animal. They average around 88 feet. The biggest ones have been over 100 feet long. The babies, that's not a baby, but that is an adult. The babies tend to be about 20 feet long at birth and 6,000 pounds. It's a big baby. Now, some organisms grow faster than blue whales, but blue whales are the fastest growing animals. So some other living things in the world can grow faster, but the blue whale baby will gain 8 pounds an hour or almost 200 pounds a day after they're born. That's a lot of weight. So some animals, they stay real small for a long period of time. They gradually change in shape and design, or they add color, or they remove color, or their eyes move around like a flatfish. In some cases, they have live birth or lay eggs, depending on what's the best way for that organism to survive. Now, for the sharks, that might be whether or not they can sit still, not have to swim all the time to breathe, like a black tip versus a bamboo shark. And in other cases, they just have what looks like the normal animal born right away, and it just grows up to be the full-size adult. there's a lot of different ways that organisms reproduce and have babies. And then how they live their life, where they live, what it takes to survive, what they eat, the environment they live in, are they able to get on land or not? That really all determines all these different adaptations for how things reproduce to create the next generation of organisms. Well, that's a lot of material to digest. Whew. Take some time to think about all those fun things. If you do have more questions about how animals reproduce, email us down that little part on the bottom, live@lbaop.org. Speaking of digestion, it's lunchtime, Ocean Rangers. We should go have some lunch. Now, this afternoon, we're going to be meeting with our Youth Scientist Camp group. And then after that, we have another program about seals and sea lions and conservation. So we have more fun for today coming up at 1 and 2 p.m. on our Pacific Standard Time. Tune in today, and then tomorrow, you can also check out more with our different Summer Kids Club camp activities. For the morning session, we'll have our Barracuda Bunch, Squid Squad, and Ocean Ranger again. So tune in, keep learning, and have some fun out there, my friends.